Hello, nice to be here. Do you like stories?
Yes.
Yeah? Sure. Cool. Because I'm going to share some stories. The stories which I experienced working with this company called iWelcome. They are in the industry of identity access management. I joined the company in November last year. Actually, that was the point when I moved from Romania to Netherlands. And I joined as a test architect. I have a slide which is going to tell you more about me. That's Dave, the one in left. Part of iWelcome, I'm part of a group which is called OCTO, Office of the CTO. It's the test architect, the solution architect, software architect, platform architect, and the CTO itself. So this was the team which actually was organized to define all the guidelines in order to build an application and a service as an identity access management provider. The other picture, it's me making fun of people doing planks during the Romanian testing conference. That's something that we usually do in Romanian testing conference. Not today, not in this session at least. That's fine. And the other thing that I do bike a lot. I'm a triathlete, so that helped me a lot in my job and as a professional career, and you'll see why. So it was quite ironic for me because I wanted to submit a call for a paper to EclipseCon while working on a project about identity access management, which involves registrations, logins, access to resources, but I couldn't. And I used 2 emails to actually get registered. It failed with the first one, then I tried with my second one, and if you ever have problems with the software, the best solution to fix it is send a tweet. So I just sent a tweet. I knew Alex, and I said, hey Alex, there's a problem with my account. I can't register to submit my paper for EclipseCon. And suddenly, in like half an hour, maybe an hour, I was able to log in with my second account. So normally, this is the software that we're trying to build behind, because we provide this service that people can actually register and get to their resources. Because IAM, it's Identity Access Management. So some of the things that our software does allows you to do a password reset, allows you to do an account activation. For example, when you log in when you submit your email to a newsletter, to subscribe to a newsletter, we can actually create you an account which is inactive and then start doing marketing campaigns to enable you actually activate that account and use it within the application. We can do other sorts of stuff, registration, social registration, login, of course. Then you can also manage your profile. But when I joined the company, this was everything that they wanted to have and they wanted to do. But when I joined the company, my first conversation was with a product owner, which said, we have our login automated. I said, well, that's cool. How do you do that? Well, we have a Selenium test, which is a tool that does user interface recognition of elements, where we go to a page, we input username and password, we click a button, and then we're logged in. And for me, that's testing a login application. I was like, really? So what do you actually validate to say that you've tested the login? And I was actually looking at that test, and they were asserting to check for the title of the next screen. And I was like, face palm, there's a lot of things to do here. So just a couple of numbers to know. At the moment, we handle 12 million emails of people registering our application. In our application, we have an uptime of 99.9, but we're still aiming to have more than that, meaning that our service is available 99.999%. And because it's software as a service, we deploy it into specific customers in all sorts of different combinations. And I'm going to show you what that means actually. Same thing, different layouts. We have different clients. The one in the middle, which only says welcome, it's our default one. But actually, when we go to customers, they want to have their own branding. They want to have their own key visuals on that. They want to have, some of them want to have the sign-up link, some of them they don't. Others want to have a help menu, others don't. It's very up to each one of them. And all these UIs needs to be configurable for us. And the testing team, before joining, they were actually struggling to constantly update and maintain the UI test, which was kind of stupid to do, because the UI as they saw it, the one with the green, it was never the one that you actually had in production. So we said we need to change something, and we need to change the way that we consider our software. Because, as a side note, at the moment, we support more than 10, let's say, authentication flows, and some of which are standards that you're not allowed to mess up with. Meaning that you actually, in the case of OpenID Connect, it means that you have a service which is standardized. You include it in your product, but you still have to be standard with that protocol when it's used through the iWelcome platform. That means just proxying it. It sounds easy, but it's not, because the challenge here is developers actually messing around with the protocol, not understanding it correctly, so that when somebody actually trying to use a standard and it's not working correctly, you can actually lose lose your impact in the application and to the customers. So we said, okay, back to the drawing board. Part of Octo, we have this huge whiteboard, and we start to have conversations. What do we want? Because we build a software. We are talking about IoT, different devices, different whatever, people connecting to the same application, but how do you actually support all these and still maintain your identity as a product or as a service? So I say we need to find our profile, define it better, and based on those guidelines, we need to start implementing and develop. So we said single tenancy, which means that every customer will get a cloud tenant within our infrastructure. We said we want to have continuous delivery because we want to be able, with every code change, we want to make a deployment to a specific customer that wants that. We want also to have the infrastructure as a service, meaning that everything is going to be code-based. If we want to create a new tenant, we can write a piece of code, run it within a tool. Our infrastructure provides an API, and we build environments via the infrastructure APIs. Most important, API first, meaning that we first care about our APIs and not about our UIs. And it turned out that more than half of our clients are actually interested in our APIs and not in our UIs. Security by design, meaning that everything that we develop, we need to take into consideration the security. You don't want to expose, when you do get all users endpoint, you don't want to expose all those users from different tenants to somebody just by mistake, because that will mean the end of our business. And privacy by default means that whenever you register and you create an account within the platform, you're fully private, not the other way around. Meaning that we don't provide any of your details to anybody, and not even emails, not even gender, shoe size, whatever is configurable. And I was asked if I give my consent to be recorded. We do have that in our application. Consent API allows you to actually configure any consent and ask your clients for anything you want. And an interesting story on that is you want to go in a cruise. Whenever you go in a cruise, you sign a contract with the travel agency. But in addition to that, you also sign a liability contract that you are actually acknowledge the risks that you take on that cruise, right? And then you go into a second cruise and you acknowledge different risks. And at one point you decide, how many consents did I give and which ones are valid at this moment or not? So we provide this type of functionality as well. So we said, okay, we need to work out on our commandments, and in order to be able to help people develop and set the guidelines, we need to work on this stuff. And some of them were already defined, some of them were already, I helped actually building them. For example, number 4, we develop and test a run which runs for 0, 1, or millions of users. We said that's not right, because there will always be a day when there are going to be 10 million, 20 millions. So you want to be able to, and there's also a mathematical model on that, 0, 1, infinity, that you don't design for a specific number, but you go on the long run. And another thing was, they said we want to test all functional, non-functional, and security aspects. And I said, no, I can't go in any conference or any testing event to say that we test all, because nobody will actually believe me. So we started to actually implement, say, okay, at least the ones that we know. So, although it sounds very easy and nice, and we've built all that framework that supports the technical aspects, and we've built those nice APIs, and we have security, and we have everything, there's always the business coming and say, we've promised this to a client and it doesn't match our product. And that's a challenge, because if the business, no matter how good or bad it is, if it promises something that doesn't match your platform or your guidelines, you start making exceptions. And once you start making exceptions, you're on the wrong path. So the moment you lose your identity as a platform and as a service provider is the moment that you start actually delivering 2 services, 3 services, or I don't know how many unmanageable services, which is, it's not the business that we want. So everybody said, okay, we need a test automation strategy because we do continuous delivery, and we have this challenge with all sorts of configurations that we need to use, that for every, if we have a client which wants to have a 2-factor authentication and we have another client which doesn't want the 2-factor authentication, how do we actually support all that? So once we said, first we said, we don't want to go and use the test automation pyramid, because that's a model that I don't fully trust. But if you want to, let's meet somewhere in the middle, and if you want a pyramid, let's build some guidelines upon those pyramids. Because if we want to be successful, we need to start having some education around the test automation, so that we can actually develop the libraries and all the support and the frameworks that we need, and then actually make use of those. And then they said, okay, but do you have an alternative? I said, of course I do. I'm doing research. I'm doing my PhD in software testing, unfortunately for me. So actually I've done a study to see whether the test automation pyramid holds in practice or not. So I've talked with the test managers who always think about pyramids, and it was actually turned out that if you count all the tests that they do, part of the automation, it's not a pyramid anymore. So I say, okay, what are we going to use? And I say, we're going to use scales. What does that mean? We're going to stop asking ourselves how many unit tests should we start implementing or how many integration tests should we start implementing, but turn it the other way around. What's the best way to test a specific feature? And for example, when you deliver a service which holds a lot of integration with other environments, unit testing doesn't become a critical and mandatory thing to do, but integration might be, or the performance between services. In a huge landscape, technical landscape, the last thing you want to be is the bottleneck. So in terms of the APIs, for example, this is a tenant. This is how it looks like. Imagine if you go into the university and they have a digital library. They've built a digital library that they want to have access to the digital library for students and teachers. They don't want to build and take the ownership of personal information. They integrate iWelcome. Think about a mailing service, like literally mailing service. PostNL, for example, they use our APIs. Another example is whenever you use a digital television, your coder actually connects to your account within the network, within the television provider. That can be also part of iWelcome service. So how are we going to test those APIs? Because that was the very first question that we got. So there are public APIs and private APIs. Simple. Public APIs is that I can see you, I can use that API, I know what the request is, what data it's being sent. Or you have the private APIs, in which those private APIs want to hide behind somebody. And that somebody or something, it's usually called a different service. So we have two levels. We said you're going to have the vertical API testing, which means that we take each individual endpoint and we just want to see if it works or not. Because once that's validated, then we can at least know that a deployment is functional. The other part is, okay, we have the vertical, now we need the horizontals. Do they work together? So if you multiply the ones, I want to be able to create an account, for example, but then I want to also know if I can log in with that account, because otherwise the use case, as we call it, it's not complete. So we started to actually validate all those and make tests around those use cases. And what happened was that all the technical consultants and all the people who were actually deploying the applications to the customers, they said, I want those tests. Give us your tests, because we find it very useful to have them. And because I'm changing configurations all the time, I don't know what the impact of my configurations is within the product. How can we actually deliver that to you? So it was very simple. We just created a Docker image with all the Postman collections that we have, and we've created a small script, 2 lines of code, and for every change that they do, they just run the code. And whenever the customer asks, did you configure that? Yeah. Is it working? Yes. How do you prove it? We have the results now. Being an API first company, this was one of the things that we could not and we don't want to automate. And I think this is the unautomatable world of the REST APIs. Because putting the meaning into those APIs, it's very, very important. And we sometimes take it for granted. The fact that a login, it's named a login, the Dutch are calling it login. It's a thought process. The fact that the model of the data is called user or new user or iWelcome user, it's also a thought process. And this was something that we had to challenge, because when it comes to naming, everybody has an opinion about that. So maybe you know about the Open API Specification Standard. We say that we fully document all our APIs. Swagger, familiar with Swagger? Okay. So this is the consent API, for example. This is how we create the actual API. Based on this Swagger, the developers are able to generate the code and the implementation around that. Whenever a customer wants to build a UI on top of our APIs, we provide them with this. And the thing that is called insert document consent for user is not the best naming, which I even hate. I don't think it's the right one. It's something that we constantly need to think about, because it needs to be consistent across all the APIs, and it needs to be very easy for different developers to use it, because in this case, the users are not normal users, are developers. And here's the story. One of the screens with the login screens you saw, it was from QB. And QB was trying to implement our login API, or put a wrapper on top of our login API. And my girlfriend is working for QB. And guess who was assigned to implement the wrapper on top of login API? My girlfriend. And I was never put into the position to actually have my product or the service that I work on to be tested or used by my partner. Which is kind of weird, because you get the real feedback when it comes to using the product. And very honest and sincere feedback, like, who the hell named that login API login API? It's obvious that it's an API. Why it's not just login? So it started to become a mindset for us that, not for me with my partner, but for us as a company, to actually think about, when we develop our APIs, think of those APIs as if they're tested by your partner or somebody very close to you. Would you make their life more easier or more difficult? Oh man, and the UI automation, this one, it was a pain in the ass. It currently is a pain in the ass. Because as you see, different colors, different locations, different wallpapers behind, different languages, everything is different. You don't see two things matching. In terms of test automation, that's very, very difficult to actually implement. So we had again to go back to the drawing board and start asking, what are the customers looking for? And that's how we found out they're looking for configurability of the application. For example, one of the things they're going to ask is, can I change the color? Yes, of course. Does it work? We know it does. Across the entire page, we're not actually sure. So we started to build tests, not to test the actual UI that it's working or not working, but to actually test the configurability of that UI, which means that we have Maybe you've heard about Consul, which is a platform behind the application. I'm going to show you immediately. It's a platform behind the application which allows you to actually toggle features or change different configurations, and based on that, you can actually define how the layout of a UI looks like. So it's not just a login in the end, because it requires a lot of work behind, and mostly because you have all these IoT devices. You don't know if behind your API stands a device, or it's a user, or it's a robot, or a bot, or somebody trying to hack you, because some of the APIs that you actually develop are going to be used, for example, for DDoS attacks, which happened lately for us. And all these corner case scenarios, the moment where you act as the gate between a potential, an end user, whoever that be, and the application and the client that actually tries to use your services, you're taking a lot of responsibility. And that needs to actually be tested very thoroughly. So just want to show you how it looks like in terms of the console and in terms of the login, that some of the users do require or some users don't require 2FAs. This is an environment that we use. The moment we click into the login, it's there. I'm on my profile. Just the username and the password, both active, works well. But the next thing that can happen is that, okay, there you go. Update, go back. Let's log out. Where's my mouse? Let's try it again. Oops. Demos don't work. Now I did. Right. Log out. Log in. No. Let me try again. Different tab. And to log out. It might be a bug though. It's hard to. I didn't practice my yoga today. No, it doesn't work at all. Yes. Yes. This, he said he sent an. It did, just now. It's here, I can show it to you. It's the right code. Resend code. No. It's true what they say about demos. Yeah, and now I don't get the code anymore. I lost my phone. Obviously. So, okay, no. Nice try. It doesn't work. So, for example, we have other use cases which are very important, and I'm going to leave you with this story. We have social registration. So you create an account via Facebook, click the login with Facebook, you have an account created, and you call service desk. hello, my name is Andrei. I called service desk because apparently when I created my account with iWelcome, I've used my mother's Facebook account because she was already logged in the browser. Okay, that's nice, service desk says. What's your account? Well, Andrei.Contan. Can you see it? Yeah, I see that you have an account, but apparently, sorry, we don't have the feature that shows us if you have a linked account, Facebook in this case, or not. And that's something that we actually identified in the product, because from a product perspective, it works. Social registration works. But the moment you start thinking about use cases in which service desk needs to unlink your Facebook account and connect it with the original one or with the correct one, those where the mismatches happen. And because you have a product owner which works on the self-service, let's say we call it my profile app, and you have another product owner which works on the service desk, if they don't talk, they don't communicate with each other, which usually happens in different other companies, not just from my experience at least, you do get these sorts of problems. So I will try to sort out the demo for those who are more curious to see how it works and how the feature toggling is happening and how the configurability is happening. If not, thank you, and I'm going to take questions if there are any.